Hi everyone, my name is Jeff Yeo. I am a technical solutions architect from Cisco Duo covering ASEAN and Greater China. So today let's talk about Zero Trust and how that can actually help organizations become more secure by design. So how does Duo help customers get into this Zero Trust startup? So let's talk a bit about the current settings in terms of the environment. Today, we are actually seeing more and more customers doing remote working because of COVID. So this has actually caused a lot of friction in terms of how users access application and data. So how do you actually trust that users connecting into your VPNs are actually trusted? Or how do you actually verify that the devices connecting in does have the latest updates? So traditionally, we do this using a network access control method where everyone's sitting in office, you have control over your wired and wired connection. But today, with workloads moving to the cloud, with workloads in your data center, a new model, Zero Trust, needs to be applied. So in this sense, we are actually seeing requirements for BYOD access. And regardless of where your workloads are actually deployed, Cisco Duo can actually help you. So let's take a look at some of the best practices in terms of adopting Zero Trust. So the first thing that we need to look at is a maturity model for Zero Trust. The first thing that we verify is basically the user. How do you know if the users sitting at home are who they say they are? So we do this traditionally by using multi-factor authentication. The other thing that we need to look at is trusted devices. Now, for trusted devices, we've seen this fail many times in network access control solutions, right? Because you have huge organizations, you have different type of devices connecting in, and you need an agent installed on every single endpoint device in order for this to be successful. However, this only secures things on your network. What happens to the application level? Network access control might not be that perfect solution. And we also need to enforce least privilege. So we all know that the IT admins have the greatest power in the organization. Changes to your VPN, changes to your firewall. Now, with them working remotely today, it is even more important that we actually put more security controls around this least privilege concept to actually ensure that our administrators are able to make changes in a very secure and very structured manner. So managed and unmanaged devices. So previously, perhaps BYOD might not be part of your strategy, right? Because we are having users in our offices, we actually have control over the devices we issue to our users. But today, we are seeing more and more IoT devices connecting into the network. We are seeing mobile devices from users connecting into resources, regardless of whether IT has allowed this or not. So this has actually caused something called shadow IT, where users actually use their own free resources in order to connect into corporate resources because IT doesn't have the capability to provide them with the proper devices. And we also see the problem of having applications everywhere. Today, I have actually seen customers deploy workloads into AWS, into Amazon, into their own data centers, and yet having a disparate level of security in terms of securing all the products. So how do we actually start in this five-phase security model? The first thing that we want to do is we want to increase our compliance. And how do we actually do this? We actually do this using our MFA solution. So today we all know that it's extremely hard to attack things like a firewall or VPN, but it's actually very easy to send a publishing email to your users and to have those users leak their passwords. You have seen this over many different cases out in the open world, right? So we actually want to reduce attack from publishing, from credential loss. We want to improve the user experience in terms of how they access our applications and data in a very secure fashion. The next step that we want to look at is how we actually gain visibility into our devices, into the activities of our users. Because in Zero Trust, when something in the environment changes, if you're using a device that has not been identified before, you probably want to put technical controls around it in order to block those devices. So the accuracy of those devices, that visibility gives you the ability to rapidly adapt to how devices connect into your network and how you actually respond to different devices when they are actually not in compliance with your security policies. So that will actually enable you application access scenarios in a very secure fashion, regardless if your workloads are in the cloud or not. And for the next point, we will actually enforce contextual security access policies. So you might be familiar to network access control policies on your network. However, it's actually a different way that we actually do it in terms of applications in the cloud and in your data center. We actually can enforce things like IP address limitations. We detect if the endpoints are on VPNs or they are using Tor browsers. So these browsers might not be as secure. These locations might be spoofed. So these are contextual information that we want to put into an enforcement policy. So this will actually help you to close security gaps without having to augment your network or your users' devices in a very dramatic manner. And it is also important that we actually put introspection into devices for trust and control. So this is to reduce risk from unknown and unmanaged devices. So you have seen the news, right? IoT devices connected to the network, and that is an entry point into your network for bigger data breaches where attackers can do lateral movements. They can actually do privilege escalations. However, from endpoint devices, the same risk happens. If that endpoint device is connected into your corporate network through your VPN, that means that you don't have the ability to do things like dynamic segmentation. So this will actually help us to improve security, not only for the organization, but also for the users, where they are aware that, hey, my endpoint device is outdated today. I need to update to the latest browsers. I need to update my operating systems to the latest versions in order for me to be secure personally and to be secure when I'm connecting into corporate data and applications. And finally, we will actually look at how to secure access to all applications, regardless of their locations. So this will actually help you improve your security posture. We can actually have higher business agility. For example, if I only have a business in Hong Kong and Singapore, and I do not have any business in Thailand and China, so I can actually do things like block certain countries, and that will actually help you reduce your attack surface area. So we actually lower the total cost of ownership because we are actually having one security solutions to actually augment our total access control solutions to the entire IT infrastructure. And that will help you improve productivity. And if you're thinking about how would I do mobility and BYOD projects, this would actually be a very suitable security framework in terms of securing that project. So we actually did a study in terms of how ready are our customers in terms of adopting this maturity model. So we actually found that a lot of our customers have already started that zero trust journey by having MFA. So that is the most basic and fundamental thing that you should think about now. OAuth's top 10, you will actually see something called broken authentication. And one of the recommendations from the OAuth's top 10 is to actually apply MFA. So this would actually mitigate any risk that you might see in terms of your credentials being compromised. So that is something that I'll actually encourage everyone to actually take up today, right? And for the second step, you would want to actually gain visibility. So 12% of our customers have already adopted that, which is pretty good results. However, the question that you might be thinking to yourself is, if you can't see what's on your network, which you can't see what kind of devices are connecting into your applications and your data, how would you apply control? So that is something that we actually move up the maturity model into the contextual access policies. And finally, you would want to actually move into all the steps that I've actually talked about in order to achieve that holy grail that we call the zero trust model. However, zero trust is not just a one solution play, right? We actually have different workloads. We actually have different requirements in terms of where our applications and data are. So it's actually a combination of different solutions put together. But in order to secure your workforce, this is definitely the first step that you might want to take. So let's actually take a look at how zero trust access can actually happen. So fundamentally, a user would use their mobile device, their laptops, in order to access an application. So this application might sit in your data center, it might be in the cloud, but notice that in the diagram, there is no VPN and there is no MDM solution. We actually establish trust because we have MFA. So I can enforce that users use things like a biometrics scan on their face or using their fingerprint ID in order to gain access into a trust, right? So that will actually establish that user level trust. And the next step that we actually do is to actually identify, is that endpoint secure? So whether it's managed or not, I want to be able to check if you have a firewall running, if you have a third-party anti-malware solution running on the endpoint. If it's a mobile device, is it jailrooted or broken? So these are things that I want to check. And finally, we put a combination of those policies, user's IP address, the location, the device health, and the user's identity into an access policy control. And that is how we can actually enable secure connection to the application. And of course, on an ongoing basis, you would also want to monitor for anomalies. Now, let's take a look at the high-level solution architecture of Duo. So Duo is actually an easy to manage solution, easy to operate, easy to use. And why is that? It's because it's a SaaS model, right? So based on this SaaS model, you don't have to worry about how will I upgrade and patch my servers, right? Do I have to actually worry about my service being up to date? So all of these are actually taken care of in the SaaS model. We do have some on-prem components because you would also have on-prem appliances, things like a firewall or VPN. So we actually use something called the Duo authentication proxy, and that will actually be able to combine radius packets in order to secure down any of this privileged access into the VPNs, into the firewalls, or if you actually have virtual desktops deployed in the environment. And of course, the identity would be based on your Active Directory. However, if you're using things like Azure AD or Okta, right? So identity is agnostic to Duo. We actually integrate with all these identity points in order to allow seamless access. We also have something called the Duo Access Gateway. So this is where we can actually do things like identity federation to the cloud. If you're protecting cloud native solutions like Salesforce or AWS, we can actually do things like single sign-on. We also have an interesting component called the Duo Network Gateway, and that would actually enable your users to access internal web applications or SSH without the use of a VPN. So you actually save on VPN licenses. Users are actually verified for user trust, device trust, and they actually gain a very comprehensive and easy to access method to access all the applications. So the policy engine that builds user trust. So I actually mentioned this earlier, trusted users. So this will actually enable us to do strong authentication against all different type of users, whether they are contractors, they are HR people, or if they are R&D. Trusted devices. So we actually do this without the use of agents, and we can actually enforce checks on the endpoint, right? So this will actually help you do very granular policies. And we actually can do trusted networks. So we actually establish network trust before the users are connecting in. So if users are using a proxy or a VPN, we can block the users from accessing these applications. And users have many different factors to choose from, right? Whether it's a Duo push or an SMS, all these are actually built into our Duo system to actually enforce the endpoint security. And we do check that the endpoints that the users are using are not tampered with, and that the endpoints have the latest versions of software installed. So that would essentially give you a good building block to establish trust. So we actually do a very interesting use case in Duo, and that being, we can actually access mobile device posture without an MDM. So what I've mentioned earlier, is your iOS device up to date? Does it have encryption turned on? Does it have Face ID enabled? Right. So this will actually help you put trust in the user's device, regardless of whether it's a BYOD device or if it's something that IT has issued. Another interesting use case that we actually have in Cisco Duo, right? A lot of our customers are on Windows system, be on a server or Windows 10. you might be doing RDP, you might be doing a local login into that server or to that Windows 10 device. So we would actually require our users to log in with their username and passwords based on their Active Directory. Following that, we would actually challenge the user with an MFA. So this would actually enable you to do a few things. If the users are traveling and they don't have internet connectivity, they can have offline access to their laptops and still be secure. For IT administrators, it's common that we actually have jump hosts, right? So from your jump host, and if you're doing RDP into your database servers, you can actually secure that privileged access into that server by having MFA enabled with the Cisco Duo. So in Cisco Duo, we talked about having monitoring as well. So our security analysts, right? So this is actually a problem in all companies. How many types of logs do you have to look at? And the goal is to actually surface actionable items so that the security analysts just have to focus on the core important issues at hand instead of looking at tons and tons of log. So in Duo, we collect a lot of information, right? Things like IP addresses, things like location, things like device types. Is the OS up to date? So with that data, we can actually apply machine learning techniques in order to analyze authentications on Gary's behalf. So we want to be able to surface things that are abnormal, things like who is accessing the application, from where, what kind of devices? Is it something that's a different time? Is it something that's a different location? So we put all these into a machine learning model. And from there, we can actually flag out all these anomalies. So the value of that to our customers is this. You get visibility and hardening, so you can actually understand what's normal for a user versus something that's not typical. We actually can refine our access policies for all these users based on different behaviors in the environment. We detect risks and we prevent it, right? High priority applications, highly sensitive data. You gain insights about all these high value assets and who is accessing these high value assets. And you reduce that security burden of investigation. Who exactly is accessing my server? Who is accessing all these applications? So that will actually enable you to stand up security operations really, really quickly. And you definitely want to have adaptive authentication. So based on different factors, based on the changes in your environment, we would want to actually have authentication that's more difficult for these attackers. So why is Cisco Duo kind of different from the other vendors out there, right? So we actually have speed to security. So we actually deliver all those building blocks under one solution, right? You don't have to go to different vendors. And that actually have a great advantage in terms of how fast you can deploy this because it's a SaaS model. So for example, I can actually secure Office 365 in half an hour, right? So ease of use. So you actually worry about how easy it is to deploy to huge organizations. So we actually have deployed to huge universities. For example, University of Queensland is currently our customers. And you can imagine the scale of the number of users, the number of employees, the number of students connecting into their infrastructure. So the ease of use is definitely something you want to think about when you're actually deploying such a solution. Broad coverage of applications. So Duo actually protects a whole host of applications, anything from your VPN to your firewall to a Unix server, cloud native applications, or even if you have an in-house built application, we have SDKs and APIs. So that will actually help you manage your total cost of ownership, right? So remember, when you operationalize a solution, it's not just the license, it's also technology, the people, and how easy it is to use, right? So we are actually having a very great score in terms of the net promoter. So a lot of our customers are actually recommending Cisco Duo to their internal folks. And that's something that's quite unique to us in terms of a provider. And we do have many of the Fortune 500 companies out there, things like Facebook, Sophos, Yelp, right? So these are huge technology companies that are using Duo to protect their core infrastructure, to protect their users when they're accessing all that important critical apps and data. So with that, let me switch over to a quick little demo of how fast and how easy it is to operate Duo, right? So over here, I actually have a application where I've integrated Microsoft Azure with Duo, and we can actually create policies around this. So over here, I actually have a policy called work from home / BYOD. So in this little policy, I can actually do something called device health check. So I would require my users to actually block access if the security agent is not running, all right? So if something is amiss, they will actually have to call help desk. So let's save this little policy here. And let's try to actually log on to Office 365 now with the user. So I'm going to be using a user connecting to the Office 365 system. Right, so let's go ahead and sign into Office 365 as this user. Right, so user keys in the username and password. So we actually do the endpoint checks, right? So as you can see, I got a dual prompt, and there's something interesting over here, right? So over here, we actually see that the user is actually connecting into Azure Active Directory. There's that username and password and the IP address. So it actually requires me to do a face scan. So I can actually do a face scan over there, quick and easy. And just like that, I'm actually connected into my application. So just like that, we can actually secure down core applications with things like a Face ID. So the other thing that we could actually do over here is we can actually do things like location blocking. So I'm actually based in Singapore, so I can actually click on Singapore, and I can actually do an action to say, hey, if you're connecting in from Singapore, I want to deny access. Okay, so let's save that policy. Okay, so let's go over to Office 365, and I'm going to log out of that account again. And let's try to log into that account again. Oh, the login was denied. So just like that, I can actually do adaptive policies for users to actually be blocked whenever they are not compliant with our security policies. So earlier, I actually mentioned about how we actually do user behavior analytics as well. So over here, as you can see, I do have something called Trust Monitor. So Trust Monitor is our user behavior analytics solution. So as you can see from here, we have Amanda. So Amanda is normally working from the US. All of a sudden, she's working from a new location, HR. So as you can see, it's denied because the location is actually restricted. And furthermore, she's actually using a new IP address. So this is something that has not been seen before. Plus, it's a new application access. So as you can see, based on the machine learning techniques and the data collected by Duo, we can actually flag out anomalies for the IT admin in a very simple and fast manner, right? So that will actually help the IT administrators understand what's happening in the environment for the particular user, and we can actually create policies around these applications in order to secure users' access. And we can actually reduce and manage our attack surface area through the use of this Duo system. So we also have another interesting integration that is with a software development kit. So on my computer, I'm actually running a Python system, right? So this is actually a custom built application running on my Macintosh. So we can actually create integrations with your in-house built applications. So you might be using a SQL database for your users to log into the custom built application, so that application can continue to use that username and password from SQL, and we actually do a login directly for the user. But because this application is highly sensitive, so that is why I can actually layer on things like a Face ID. So in order to secure this application, which has highly secure data, I need users to do things like a Face ID scan or a fingerprint scan before they access to this highly secure application. So with an SDK, with an API integration, most of your on-prem components can actually be secured with Duo. right? So with that, I would actually like to thank you for your time in joining me today. And that would be the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your time, and please stay safe.